And we're live.
This is Plant Daddy Podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven. Hi everyone, we are trying something new today. Welcome to our first Minisode, where we will focus on a single trending plant that we are excited about right now.
Right now! So, Steven, what plant are we profiling today, and why did we pick it?
We are talking about Stephania erecta, a caudex plant from Southeast Asia. Matthew started talking about these plants a few months ago, and he correctly guessed that I liked these. Or maybe he had already placed the order online? Unclear. So how did you guess I like these, Matthew?
Well, basically, look at it. It's a really cool looking plant, and you are absolutely notorious for lusting after plants that look like dead twigs or diseased lumps. And I really love how dramatic the foliage is and the aesthetic value. So the first time that I saw Stephania erecta, I just knew this would be a plant that we would both respond to. It has a large, round, woody caudex, kind of like a firm potato.
Yeah.
And it sprouts light green herbaceous twining vines that grow these really interesting circular leaves. Plus, its Latin name gave us a really easy inside joke for us, as Chris and I got to just call it the Stevens Boner plant. So obviously back in May, when my interest in these reached critical mass, I just had to pick up a couple of these for us to give a try.
Okay, so you're not incorrect, in your reasoning for thinking why I like these. But another reason I was intrigued is the fact that there's so little information online about these right now, especially growing information. Matthew knows I love the idea of growing plants that are rare or less well-known or new to cultivation or anything, special, air quotes.
Yeah, literally if it's listed on the internet, Steven's interest drops by 75%.
Yeah. So anyway, as recently as a month ago, I was looking for pics on Instagram and messaging accounts of people who had this asking for care advice. And most people were nice enough to respond, and that was really indispensable. And the advice varied a little bit, but it really helped. So, Matthew, let's start our walkthrough. You opened the shipping box containing the plants, and what did you do with your round, flat, rootless, potato-looking caudex?
They're kind of flat-ish. The caudex that I have was a little bit more round than yours, which was a little bit more flat, but basically, I just opened it up and put mine into a shallow bonsai dish because I figured that they would want to stay fairly root bound. A lot of caudiform plants don't like huge pots.
Yeah, I think with this one in particular, we see a lot of really flat dishes and displays, at least in the Instagram photos I look at.
And I think that might be why those photos become so popular, because there's something really striking about this plant in a small, usually really cool looking handmade clay pot, like a pot with a lot of character offsets this plant really nicely, so it makes for great photos and instant presentation.
Yeah, and this caudiciform is so interesting to look at, right?
Yeah.
That it's almost a shame to bury it. I mean, I guess if you like the
I think it would
potato
rot
look.
if you did.
Yeah, actually, yes. That would also be a shame. So what kind of soil did you prepare for yours?
So, like you said, there's very little information online. In fact, it's not even listed in Wikipedia in the species list for this genus, and there's no individual page listing. But I saw that a lot of growers were recommending that it needed something that was very well draining, which is pretty typical for caudiform plants.
Yeah.
And a lot of them talked about peat moss, which even though that is a very moisture retentive substance, and it's not really well known for its fast draining qualities, I decided it was more important to have fast draining than moisture retention for the root development, because my biggest fear was having the caudex rot with too much present moisture before it had any roots to use it.
Yeah.
So I used a pretty standard succulent mix with a lot of pumice and sand and perlite, and there was peat in there, so it was fairly moisture retentive. But to further guard against the potential for rot, I buried it maybe a third to half of the way, and then used a top dressing of gravel to make sure that the moisture was staying low below it to encourage roots growing downwards.
Okay, and then where did you put this plant in your house? So light, moisture-wise?
I started out keeping it with my orchids under grow lights because the humidity was fairly high there. I wasn't going to do anything super precious about keeping it in a terrarium because I want it to be a good house plant, and I didn't want it to acclimate to some condition that I couldn't maintain just standard TV watching. So I started it there. didn't do a whole lot. So then I moved it under much brighter grow lights that I use for my pinicula. And the humidity was lower, but that didn't seem to bother it too much. I've moved it around a little bit more since then, though, but the light has been somewhere around like what you would use for most of your indoor tropicals that want bright indirect light.
Okay. Yeah, and I'd say for me, it was pretty similar. I did end up using peat in my soil, but I remember feeling kind of conflicted about that. Like this, I understood this to be a succulent, and then I got home and I was like, well, I think what I ended up doing is taking a standard succulent soil. I used the EB Organics one. It's a cactus soil for reference. I think I added some pumice. I added some peat to it, which is just it just feels odd to be adding these kind of conflicting elements, maybe.
That's exactly how I felt, and that's exactly what I ended up doing.
Yeah, but so it's strange. I look over there, it's like kind of like dry peat that I'm seeing all the time, but I planted mine in a bit more of a deep pot than yours. I think mine is probably 3 or 4 inches deep. It is terracotta, so it isn't something that's gonna like retain moisture much. But yeah, it seemed to do okay. I didn't have any die off or slowing or anything that I noticed. As far as light, I put this on a winter succulent table, so it was getting about 7 hours under a grow light, and then it would turn off. It would get, I don't, maybe it would get a little bit of sun during the day, like as the wind, as it passed through the window, but it would be pretty brief where it is. It's pretty far from the window. And as far as watering, I was watering it really like I water my other succulents. So yeah, I mean, nothing too special there. And really similar with you, like I wasn't keeping this in a closed container. I was not worrying too much about heat. We can talk a bit about that later, but yeah, I wasn't doing some of those things that you read about.
Yeah, the original watering that I was doing was like I'd soak it after it had been dry for a while because I couldn't tell if there were any roots. Now that I think that mine does have roots, I'm watering it more consistently so that it's drying just a little bit between waterings, and I haven't noticed any problems with that.
And that makes sense. So when we were asking for different information online to these different growers that we found on Instagram, we heard a few alternatives pretty consistently. So the most common things we heard were people were keeping their plants in closed containers to retain humidity, and that people were using heat mats to keep the roots warm and the pot warmer than the ambient temperature. So, like we both have said, I think we've made little attempts in these directions. Like, I do mist my plant when I think about it. I mean, not super heavily. I also have it above my dishwasher, which sounds kind of, funny maybe, but then when the dishwasher is drying, that part of the countertop becomes warmer. So I think it gets a little bit of warmth like this during the day. And I also just have my house kind of at summer temperatures. Like, I don't air condition, so it's it can get up to 80 degrees Fahrenheit in my house and everything. Have you done any of these alternative things? You said you've moved it around a bit, but
Yeah, well, the biggest thing was just how long it took to sprout. That was my biggest surprise.
Yeah.
The 2 codexes that we received in the mail, the one that you took had more active growth, but even then it was like less than a centimeter of new sprouted vine. Mine had just like the smallest indication that that was going to begin. So it took so long to begin growing that my biggest concern was just getting it to start growing so that it would have roots and it would start responding to my conditions.
I remember this being suspenseful as well.
Like for both of us, because we
Yeah.
both kind of found the same thing. And I actually had an accident with mine. I have this habit of perching plants precariously on the edges of areas that people walk past. And so this is a plant that got knocked off, and it's absolutely gorgeous, one of a kind celadon bonsai dish.
It was so cool.
It was the prettiest pot that I've ever owned, and it was way too expensive. But it broke, and that's what it was growing in. So I actually just left the unpotted corm sitting under my panicula lights because there were no roots yet. It had already been potted for a couple of months, and I just like let it sit there, and I let the vine grow a little bit longer.
This sounds like a punishment for the plant. Okay, it broke your most beautiful.
It was more like I didn't
Container.
want to deal with it because I was trying not to be upset about the beautiful pot that broke. And I also wanted to make sure that it had a really nice pot because
Yeah.
that's like half the charm of these.
Kind of.
Yeah. So that was the point though when Stephen got the hint about increased humidity and increased warmth. And so learning that and knowing that my plant had no roots and Stephen's had like one tiny baby root, I then potted it up in a terracotta pot, the same kind of soil, the same way that I was treating it before. And I actually put it on top of one of my vivariums. It's a tropical planted tank, and it has both fluorescent and LED lights above for growth. But they put off quite a lot of heat. So
Yeah.
if there's anything that I want to have more heat, I actually just put them on top of that. And I've used that for rooting cuttings. I've used that for germinating seeds. So when I put this plant in a little shallow dish that I could periodically flood with water to water it from below, I noticed it start to grow quite a bit quicker. However, the lights in that area are lower. It's not as bright of an area. It's more appropriate for like begonias or like parlor palms. So I think that my light in this location is a little bit weak, and the growth is definitely much longer. It's actually starting to branch, but I think I need to put it somewhere with better light so that I get really strong leaf growth.
Yeah, so I think, yeah, maybe you would be served if you found a surface that's a bit warmer. And there might be something like this in your house, whether you have lights or not. So, as far as where our plants are now, a couple months in, it seems like they're done flowering. And they have some hints of some leaves that are coming, at least on mine. I think is on Matthew's as well. And honestly, I'm not sure, maybe Matthew, if the leaves are going to come in a separate stalk or the same one from the flowering stalk. I've actually read conflicting things here. It seems on mine that the leaves are going to come in the same stalk, but I only have one tiny leaf. It's maybe 3 millimeters. That's about it.
Yeah, it's actually interesting comparing both of our plants. Yours is put on a growth spurt towards this later part of summer. Similar to mine, mine is still longer than yours, but yours bloomed more heavily than mine did.
Really? Okay.
Mine had a few little flowers. If you're excited about flowers like I am, don't buy this plant for them. They're very small. They're pointless. There's like nothing special about them.
Yeah, I was unclear if that was the flower for a while because I'm like, oh, is this just a bud and then this is
Yeah.
gonna open? Like they're tiny and they're kind of
Well, and apparently the genus is named Stephania after like the Greek word for crown because of how the anthers and the flower are arranged. They're too small to notice that, but on mine it seems that each flower cluster is born at the node where a leaf is coming out. And I
Yeah.
have a lot of very small, like embryonic looking leaves,
Yeah.
but none of them are really like growing into a full size one yet.
So it seems like mine, only at the very top am I getting something that maybe looks like a leaf. And, is this telling me that it needs more light? I'm not really sure yet. And actually, it's getting so tall that it's kind of growing past the light. I may have to move mine. But
Yeah.
anyway, so now, Matthew, what is your sense of availability? How easy are these to get?
Well, basically, like they're really available online.
Yeah.
They're not available in any shop that I have been in. I've never seen one for sale in real life. But when I did a search on Etsy, eBay, and Amazon, which are kind of like the three places that I check for plants sometimes, it was available in all of those places. So they're not terribly expensive either.
Yeah, what was the price you saw?
I think I spent $25 for our two like medium large sized codexes.
Okay. And I saw them for sale once in person. A shop in Fremont, I think it's called Peace, Love, and Happiness, at Fremont in Seattle. And there I saw kind of a bowl full of these, just like the caudiciforms or something. Like maybe they were $20 each.
So kind of the way that like you'd go buy loose bulbs during
Exactly,
fall.
actually, yeah.
Okay.
So it was just sitting there, and they had some care directions that are sort of, a mishmash of what we're saying. In your online search, Matthew, did you see any that were in active growth? Like, can you buy a plant and kind of skip all of this warming and waiting?
No. Just like with a lot of bulb plants, they are much easier to store and to ship while they're dormant. So I would be surprised if you were actually able to locate a plant that was in active growth. And if you did, I would also expect the price to be significantly higher than a comparably sized tuber that you could just like wake up yourself.
And I think if you see this plant in person and start growing it, I think you get the sense that it's fragile enough. I mean, I feel like it's fragile enough that shipping would probably be harsh and just break the stem anyway.
Yeah, we've been calling it a succulent, and I know that a lot of people think of succulents as a kind of specific fleshy thing. This is a succulent in the way that people think of Codex plants as succulents, where the leaves above are actually like soft, tender, and herbaceous.
Hmm.
Again, I've never seen one in real life with thick, lush leaves, so I don't really quite know what that texture is, like by touch.
Yeah.
But they seem like a plant that has tender, herbaceous growth that would be very easily damaged in shipping.
All right, so sort of to wrap up here, how do we feel about Stephania erecta as a houseplant? Like, is this a great choice for a lot of growers? Is this appealing?
Well, it's appealing for sure. I'm going to say that I'm hesitantly positive about this plant. I always feel anxious when I start growing a new plant that I can't find any detailed information to research. So I basically feel like I'm just flying blind on this one. It sprouted after I put it in bright light and began watering it, but without the roots, like I said, I was really worried about the Codex rotting. And any Codex lovers out there are going to know that this is like kind of a typical thing for these drought resistant plants, especially when they're not in active growth.
Yeah,
So once the vine began to sprout, it just grew so much slower than I was anticipating. Like I'm
same.
used to like you pot up some daffodils and like wow they're flowering.
Daffodils.
You know like
Some Monsanto daffodils that are gonna grow. Okay, I'm kidding.
narcissus are lovely, but this has not been a fast impact plant. So even though we kind of have like limited information available, I felt like the tip about heat was the most useful one that I had. And I'm really not sure about the light level, like I said. So I suspect that with more light, I'm going to get a plant that's beautiful. But right now, it's just not doing much. It's basically a vine with nothing else happening. So I'm just trying to be patient. Jury's still out. It's not really impressing me yet, but I believe in its potential because I think that the pictures that I've seen online are
Mm,
really striking. It's a beautiful plant, and I love a plant that has a peltate shaped leaf, which is where the petiole attaches into like the center of the back of the leaf. You'll see
mm,
this in like lotuses and nasturtiums. That's one of my favorite leaf shapes, and I think that the really beautiful kind of velvety blue green color with the lighter colored
yeah.
veining gives it just this really wonderful texture that would be very nice on a windowsill or among other tropical plants.
Yeah, so I kind of agree with Matthew in the sense that, like, it's not a very fast gratification sort of plant at all.
It seems fairly tough though.
Yeah, that's a good thing. I mean, we've treated ours like slightly differently. We've definitely moved them around a lot. You've dropped yours, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it really, and then at one point I was looking at mine thinking, oh gosh, it doesn't have roots yet. I picked it up and basically pulled out the root. I mean, it was attached, like it was attached to the codex still, but I was like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna put you back, and it doesn't seem like it missed a beat. So, yeah, that part I guess is sort of mixed, slow but tough. As far as the look, I would agree. Like, I think this might be an interesting intersection of interest for people. Like, there's a codex here. You can do interesting things with the planting. The foliage is also interesting for the
It's
reasons
not
that you're
something that you
saying.
see in a lot of other houseplants, so
Yeah.
that's like its biggest mark right there for me.
Yeah, I think my reluctance, though, to call this like the next big houseplant that everyone will have, I just feel like it's kind of too slow and too difficult to explain how to grow it.
Well, the
You
fact that
know?
there aren't explanations, the majority of resources that I found were from sellers. And the
Yeah.
sellers themselves are like, give it medium light, keep it
Hmm.
consistently moist, but worry about overwatering. Like, as we complain about in our indestructible plant episode,
Hmm.
like, that is just not useful information. Um, I think that the appeal for these would be much higher if they were being sold in nurseries where people could see them in active growth.
That's a great point, actually. I don't think, well, yeah, we both have never seen these. We just kind of see, this on Instagram. And, I think a lot of these growers are in Asia where, these are maybe more common.
Yeah, most of the places that supply them are in Thailand.
Okay, so I guess this kind of tacks onto this question, like, is this here to stay? Is this just going to be a part of so many people's collections for the next 10 years, like maybe the Pilea
I think that there will
would be?
always be dedicated like collectors who like these. There are lots of accounts on Instagram that we follow where people have like these really gorgeous Stephania plants. There's a bunch of different species actually, like about 45 of them. Some of them are really important in Chinese medicine, but
Yeah.
this is the one that people are growing ornamentally and it's the one that's popular right now. But I don't really see it as having a very lasting impact in the houseplant market, given that they are really slow to sprout. It takes a long time from potting it up to it being like an attractive, beautiful plant that you would want
Yeah.
from seeing it on Instagram.
And I'm kind of imagining these will have a pretty unattractive dormancy as well, right?
Well, that's the shame about them is that I don't mind a houseplant that goes dormant, but if you're going to go for bang for your buck, like buy something else that's going to look attractive year round. I can't really think of an alternative to this plant that I would specifically recommend if you like the look and the style and the feel of it because it's so unique.
Yeah.
But if you're gardening outdoors, just plant nasturtiums because kind of objectively they look very similar if you ignore the flowers on the nasturtium and the corm on the Stephania. If you like that leaf, it's like a nasturtium.
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe some woody pelargonium species. It kind of reminds me of some of those. Like leaves are definitely different, but
Yeah.
okay, there's like a ball that's kind of woody looking, and there's a vine with leaves, and those just seem well certainly easier to get.
And something that I appreciate about other Codex plants is that even when they are dormant, because this is something that Codex plants do, they are actually like still really striking and they look really cool. This looks like a round potato.
Yeah, it's without the leaves. I don't know where I'm gonna really put this. It's just
Yeah.
gonna look like
Just put it up on top of a cabinet
Yeah, like
and then yeah.
yeah, because it's just gonna look like you forgot that you put a potato in this pot.
And people will constantly be asking you like, is that a rock or a
Yeah.
potato?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that it's going to really have a lasting impact on the houseplant community. I think that a way that that could change is if they became available in active growth at garden centers.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening in the near future. I think it's going to take a while for these to catch on. And if there's no market for them to encourage that from nurseries and plant sellers, I just don't really see it as more than like a unique collector's item that'll have a momentary bit of popularity among plant daddies like us. So thank you for listening to our very first Plant Daddy Minisode.
Quick take, plant profile, minisode. You'll
Yeah.
you'll hear what we decide to call it.
Yeah, but in summary, Stephania erecta is a beautiful, unique-looking Codex plant, and it's gaining so much popularity on the internet and becoming pretty widely available through online sources. It's a really slow grower with a dormant period, and it does need a few things that are pretty critical for optimal growth, as we have found ourselves. But overall, this is a really approachable plant that any succulent collector, Codex plant enthusiast, foliage plant lover, or just lover of botanical oddities should consider for their windowsill. If you are interested in other little quick takes about plants, this is going to be a recurring segment that we do where Stephen and I will get some popular trending plant, grow it ourselves for a little while, and then let our listeners know kind of what our thoughts are. I know that some plants that I want to talk about in the future are Begonia maculata wrighty, which is gorgeous, one of my easiest begonias. And there's a few others that we've discussed. So go ahead and take a look for those as we begin recording those episodes.
Awesome. This has been Plant Daddy Podcast. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, give us 5-star ratings. If you want to be in touch, email us at plantdaddypodcast@gmail.com or check out our social media. It's all Plant Daddy Podcast. Looking forward to you tuning in next time. Thanks for listening. Happy growing.
Bye.